Yeah, I think it's in our nature to discover and learn things. I don't think God put all these things around us for us to just go, oh, cool. We've been given all these things, and throughout the history of humanity, we are we were given the gifts of intellect and free will. And he didn't give us that gift of intellect to just put it on the shelf. He wants us to exercise it. So we're curious. We want to understand. Well, as a boy, growing up in LA, not far from the beach, and really, this little town or community I grew up in, Los Angeles, right by the airport, was really more like Mayberry RFD than it was a big city. It was really a small community. And in the summertime, it was not untypical to get up in the morning and dial up all my friends and say, what are we doing today? And the choices were, we're either going to get together and play baseball, or we're going to play football, or can your mother drive to the beach? We always wanted someone to say, yeah, my mom will drive us to the beach, because that's where we really want to go. And one day I did that and called up my friend Bill Toomey. And Bill was one of 7 boys, a good Irish Catholic family, and Bill was a year behind me in school, but we were peers in sports. And he said, well, my mom can't drive, but one of my older brothers is home from college, and we're leaving for the beach in about 10 minutes if you can get over here. So I asked my mom, sure, jumped on my bike, went up there, got in this station wagon with every other kid in the block that could pile in there, and off we went to Manhattan Beach. And I was sitting in the back with Bill, and I said, what's your brother's name? Because I'd never met him before. He said, that's Dan. And I yelled up from the back, hey, Dan, where do you go to college? And he said, I go to the Air Force Academy. And I said, what's that? I'd never heard of the place. And it was at a time in my life, I was probably about 12 years old, where I was I'd pretty much decided I wanted to be a pilot, or I thought I did, but I had no earthly idea how I could learn to be a pilot. And so I said, well, what's that? He said, it's a school in Colorado. You go there for 4 years, you get an education, and then they teach you how to fly jets. I said, well, do you have to stay in the Air Force? He says, yeah, you have to serve 5 years. And I said, okay, well, could you be an airline pilot after that, which was my dream? And he said, yes, a lot of guys do that. And that day, sitting in the back seat of the Toomey Mobile, a station wagon, on the way to Manhattan Beach, having a conversation with someone who was driving, I was looking at the back of his head, I learned about a school where if I could go there, I could become a pilot. And if I had missed that ride to the beach, I don't think I ever would have heard of the Air Force Academy, because I hadn't before. And it was during the Vietnam War, and those kinds of places weren't being promoted as places you ought to go to school. So that was a life-changing experience for me, that ride to the beach. So when you look at setting goals, I think it's really important to have goals at all ages of your life. And but if you measure me and my successes, did I achieve the very first goal that I set and actually hung on to for many years? I'm an abysmal failure. I never became the airline pilot that I dreamed and knew I wanted to be at various stages of my life, not just as a 12-year-old. But that still, I had that goal, and that goal motivated me to persevere in really tough times for me personally at the Air Force Academy. I was not going to quit because I was going to be an airline pilot. And along the way, so it's important to have a goal. But it's also, I think, important to not be afraid to change your goals as you go through life, and not be so wedded to it that you just put blinders on and don't scan the other possibilities that are offered to you quite often without you even asking for. And then as you adjust fire on those goals, adjust focus, it's as important to work as diligently toward achieving those as it was the last goal you had in mind. Oh, for sure. Yeah, on my first flight, and every flight, you can't help but be struck by the beauty of the planet. And it's just an awe-inspiring moment to look down and see the creation, this great gift that God has given us to live on the earth. And so that's one thing, that's one perspective. It's just the breathtaking beauty and the uniqueness. You're so appreciative that you have this unique perspective on the earth that not everybody will ever have the opportunity to have. And that's humbling, frankly. The other thing is, I'll tell a quick story. Everyone wants to take a picture of their hometown from space. So, so I grew up in Los Angeles, and and you can predict when you're going to fly over a certain spot. It was like flight day 3 or something, and I knew we were going to have a good pass right over the top of Los Angeles. And I'd set my alarm that morning, and so the alarm goes off. I go up to the windows, get the cameras all set up. We were coming up over the South Pacific on a northeast course, and miracle of miracles, it was a clear day in Los Angeles. I mean, no smog. It was just gorgeous. It was springtime. And, so I started taking pictures of LA. And then I put the camera down and just looked. And I did something that, it wasn't an original thought, but it was something we trained to do as fighter pilots. If you wanted to look into the sun to see if someone was sneaking up on you, one way to see closer to the sun, to the disk, was to put your hand out at arm's length, make a fist, and put it over the sun, or put your thumb over it and close one eye, and then you can see really close to the disk without burning your retina. I closed one eye, stuck my hand out, put my thumb over 8 million people. They all disappeared under my thumb, looking out the window at Los Angeles. And I thought, so it made me start thinking about, Christ's teachings about, God cares about you. If he cares, the sparrows, if he takes care of the sparrows, think how much more he takes care of you and looks after you. And there's 6 million people down there that I'm covering up with my thumb, and God's keeping track of everybody on the planet and everybody that ever was on the planet and everybody that ever will be, and loves them and cares for them. And I thought that was a humbling moment for me. And it also made me reflect that everybody under my thumb there, all 6 million people, every one of them has a problem today. It may be something that's solvable, but maybe it's not. As some people say, we all have rocks in our rucksack. And if we appreciate that about other people, we're often kinder to them. But also, we oftentimes fall into the trap of thinking we're the only one with rocks in our rucksack. And I made a conscious thought at the time when I come home to Earth. I'm going to try to keep things more in perspective, both how other people behave and act, and because I don't know what's in their rucksack, what their troubles are, and then how seriously I take my troubles in comparison to the love of God and His mercy. My first flight, we weren't out of control, but we did have some severe difficulties accomplishing the mission. And there were some moments that were very tense on board. I never felt that our life was at risk, but we certainly felt that the mission success was at risk. And, that oftentimes is more important to you than, even your own personal safety. You're just so focused on getting the job done. And I was not the leader of the flight. I was a crew member. I was a pilot, which is NASA's for co-pilot. And I had a great commander who was a great leader. And I thought the leadership he demonstrated was fantastic. But it required all of us to be leaders as well. And so the lesson that I think to be taken from this is, at the end of the day, the leadership of an organization or a group or a team or whatever, they bear the burden of responsibility of the decisions they make and the courses they set for the team. But a wise leader knows that he or she doesn't have all the answers all the time. And they have to be willing to release, or at least lighten the reins of leadership on their team, and allow informal leaders to rise up on the team and actually take charge of the conversation, if you will, and allow that creativity to blossom in the team. Knowing at the end of the day, though, that you have to pull the reins back in and take on the burden of decision for the team. And Dan did that with us. We did this. We had trained for a year and a half to accomplish the mission a certain way. We failed twice in a row. We had just enough fuel to complete another attempt at it, and we threw away the book. And in less than 24 hours, we totally, as a crew, on orbit, came up with a new plan that we then had to convince the ground would be safe to do. But it was revolutionary in many regards. And it wasn't just all Dan's idea. That the idea that troubleshoot, the problem solving rotated around amongst us, and leaders popped up and then stepped back throughout that conversation. And watching that happen, just taught me, and it may have been something it was something I had been trained on before, but it was empirical now. I could see it, that's how we got to the solution that ultimately worked. I think it'll make America better. I mean, I think it's great that this is an exciting time. I mean, now would be a great time to be getting into the business of space, I think, because I think it's a booming business once again. And whether you're, want to be flying in space or just working in the business, and most people are going to be just working in the business, which I contend is equally as exciting as being an astronaut. I mean, I used to work in mission control when I wasn't training for a flight, or I'd work down at the Kennedy Space Center supporting launch operations, and it's just really cool work. I mean, I loved it. And now we're seeing this open up beyond just NASA, beyond just the Department of Defense, to include a commercial sector that's growing and vibrant. And I just think there's so many more opportunities to participate in the space business, whether it's civil, commercial, or military, than there were when I was in the Air Force. And I think it's a great time to dive into that. So I'm excited. Well, I think it's in our nature to discover and learn things. I don't think God put all these things around us for us to just go, oh, cool. I mean, we've been given all these things, and throughout the history of humanity, we were given the gifts of intellect and free will. And he didn't give us that gift of intellect to just put it on the shelf. He wants us to exercise it. So we're curious. We want to understand. We want to understand everything. And it's natural, I think, for us to want to explore the unknown. And so Mars is an unknown, and the moon is an unknown. We think we know the moon because we went there 6 times or landed there. So we don't begin to know the moon. There's the curiosity, the intellectual drive that is important, I think, and worthy of doing. And I think, people talk about spin-offs, and they some poo-poo them, some emphasize them. I think what drives progress are problems that start out as seeming to be unsolvable problems. And so you work them, and you work them really hard. And what happens typically is a new technology arrives, or a new material, or whatever, or a new technique, and you accomplish the problem. And then in that process, things are discovered that become more important to humanity than just to that problem. And whether that's computer technology or miniaturization or new materials that allow you to fly airplanes or do things that we hadn't imagined doing on Earth before, but because we had to solve this problem to go to the moon, we now have the tools to solve other problems. And I think as we set these difficult goals to achieve to conquer the technological challenge I've talked about and the psychological challenges, there'll be benefit to humanity. And I think it's worth the investment on those levels. The other one, I'll never forget a lecture that John Young gave our class when we were brand new astronauts, our first year in training. And John is probably the most unsung astronaut of note that I know. He was an amazing man. He's passed on now. But John flew 6 times in space. He flew 4 different spaceships. First flight of Gemini, flew to the moon on Apollo 10, orbited the moon. So he flew a command capsule. On Apollo 16, he landed on the moon and walked on the moon, so he flew the LEM. And then he flew the very first space shuttle flight, as the very first test flight, which we had never done before in the history of NASA, launch a spaceship into space with humans on it without first launching it unmanned to see if it would work. I mean, this guy was an amazing astronaut and engineer and patriot. And he was talking to us about the first time he went to the moon. And he did the thumb trick too. He said, here I am. He says, you launch and you leave, you first go into orbit around the Earth, and you're close. You can't even see the whole globe. And then you burn the engine and you start your journey to the moon. And after the first day, you look back and you can see the entire Earth, and it looks spherical. I mean, it looks like a ball. And it's an amazing view. He says, and then the next day, when you look back, it looks like a disc. It's not three-dimensional anymore. It looks like a poker chip. It's flat. And then you get to the moon, and you're in orbit around the moon. And now when he stretched his arm out and put his thumb out, he didn't cover up 6 million people in Los Angeles. He covered up the entire planet Earth under his thumb. And he said, that's everything I know. That's every person I'll ever possibly know. That's every experience I can ever experience the rest of my life is covered up under my thumb. And he said to himself, what are you doing? What have you done? He said, and here I am exactly where I want to be. And suddenly this feeling grabs my heart that's saying, you're out of your mind for doing this. And now, he said to us, imagine if when you look back at planet Earth, it looks like every other star in the sky because you're in orbit around Mars. What's that going to do to the human psyche? How do you deal with that? And I think he's exactly right. There's a psychological aspect of long-duration spaceflight and deep space spaceflight that we haven't begun to think about enough, that we better think about before people go off to Mars.